All right. Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me here in the room? I'm sporting a double microphone setup because we're recording this evening. So this is part of our ongoing educational series presented by the Wolf River Conservancy. My name is Eric Houston. I'm the executive director of the Wolf River Conservancy. And for the last few years, we've done a series of monthly webinars and lectures where we'll bring in subject matter experts and have them talk about their professional life and their passions. And we've started getting into this in-person lecture series. And so I want to thank you for joining us tonight. We're going to be doing more of these. We're also going to be continuing with our webinar series as well. And so if you're not familiar with that, that can be found on our website at www.wolfriver.org. For tonight, we're here to hear Mr. Steve Reichling. And Steve has worked at the Memphis Zoo for 44 years. He's heavily involved in the captive management of reptiles and amphibians and their conservation in the wild, leading the zoo component of the recovery program for the critically endangered dusky gopher frog. He's been studying the extremely rare Louisiana pinesnake since 1984, publishing research that elevated it from subspecies to species, and leading the zoo-based recovery effort. In addition to herpetology, he is intensely interested in tarantulas. My middle daughter would love that. Dr. Steve Reichling was recently featured in the New York Times, an incredible accomplishment, for his work helping rescue the critically endangered dusky gopher frog. And so, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Steve Reichling.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thanks for coming out, everybody. I've been really excited about coming and speaking to you for the months that I've known about this talk since Kathy invited me. I really admire the work that the Conservancy does. Habitat protection is really where it's at. I'll probably mention a little bit about that in my talk because the zoos tend to focus naturally. Their strengths are often focusing on specific species protection, but in this day and age, that's not big enough in many cases, and we recognize that too at the zoo, which I'll also mention. But anyway, so what I'm here to do, I'm not going to probably be, it's not going to be particularly scary talk. I will talk about snakes. I have to talk about snakes. I may briefly mention tarantulas, but for the most part, what I'm here to do is to talk to you about the big conservation programs that the Memphis Zoo is undertaking. Not everything that we do, but our biggest programs, our main programs. And I want to start off, I don't know, you don't have to raise your hand or answer, but I'm just asking you the question. I wonder how many of you knew that the Memphis Zoo actually had a dedicated research department. Not just that the zoo does research, you probably mostly all assumed that, but we actually have a department, a fairly large department of 13 people now and still growing, of scientists who do scientific research and do field research on endangered species. They're not, I don't have the exact numbers, but I would say the majority of zoos in the United States do not have such a department. So in that way, we're one of many ways. That way, the Memphis Zoo really stands out. The history of our conservation and research department goes back to giant pandas. I always say that the best thing that giant pandas ever did for the zoo, maybe for Memphis, depending on your perspective, is it gave us a conservation and research department. When we first decided that we were going to get giant pandas, or we're going to seek them and try to get them, one of the things we had to have as a zoo to get our permit from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to import pandas, as well as it was a requirement from our future Chinese colleagues who were going to loan us the pandas, was that we had to have a research program that was focused on giant pandas, based largely in China, but also some work over here. So we had to have scientists. We had to hire scientists who could manage and run such a program and participate in scientific research on giant pandas. Initially, that was our main focus. And so we hired a couple of people. There was 2 people initially when they first came to the zoo. This was in about 2000 and it was 2000 and 2000, wasn't it? 2000 and 2001, I think. 23 years, yeah. 2002, somewhere in that line. So anyway, we had a couple people come And initially, their sole purpose was to develop research programs for giant pandas and to work with colleagues in China. As the years went by, other interests rose, and our first director of conservation research happened to be a herpetologist, happened to be very interested in amphibians. So Dr. Kuba naturally thought, well, this is an opportunity for me to focus on the things that I know, that I'm good at, and I want to pursue. So we started working with amphibians, assisted reproductive technologies, which is basically just ways to get amphibians that don't want to breed in captivity just the natural way or just the seasonal way. How can we use hormones and environmental manipulation and other techniques to get rare and endangered species to breed? So we did that for many years parallel with our work with giant pandas. Another decade or so went by, and eventually I took over the position, and one of the things that I was pretty focused on doing was to not make it just my expanded herpetology department, my expanded reptile department. I came from managing the reptile house, and I wanted us to expand out to other species as well as maintain our established work with reptiles and amphibians. And so that is what we have done over the past few years, is broaden our reach outside of our country, outside of our local area, and also broaden our taxonomic focus to include things other than reptiles and amphibians besides pandas, which of course now are gone, not part of the zoo. So I mentioned at the front of the slide, talked about the good deeds that the Conservation and Research Department do for wildlife. And I kind of like the idea of deeds. Deeds are kind of like good deeds for people. They're kind of like drop-in things where you pop in and you do something nice for somebody or some situation, and then you leave, but there's no way that you're going to make everybody happy, be able to protect everybody, be able to help everybody. And so that's what we do in our Conservation and Research Department. The problem with biodiversity, loss of biodiversity in the world has become so gigantic, so huge, and frankly, so depressing that there's just no way that any institution or any facility can fix the problem. And so what we do is we just try to target specific problems that we believe that we can be effective with and do those good deeds for that wildlife, for that particular conservation problem. And if everybody does that, then you really get somewhere. Now, the history of zoos, so anybody know what the first zoo in the United States was? Anybody know maybe? The first zoo. It would be the Philadelphia Zoo, my childhood zoo. And it opened in, I think, 1874, 1875, something about like that. So zoos have been in the United States for about 150 years. And actually it works out really nicely. There are 3 phases that zoos have followed since those first zoos, and they're each about 50 years long. And I won't go into the first 2, but around the early 1960s, the mid-1960s, zoos, for the first time ever, thought that they could have an impact on wild conservation. Before that, they just displayed animals, a place for people to come and look at animals, gawk at animals, have fun seeing animals, and that sort of thing. But in the 60s, we thought we could really make an impact. And the thing that was often said at that time, the metaphor was that zoos are now the modern ark, that by taking on a few pairs of endangered giraffes, gorillas, dusky gopher frogs, whatever, and breeding those frogs, we could first off create a captive population that would be immune from their extinction in the wild. We would have at least that insurance that those animals, although they may be gone from the wild, they're always going to be there in captivity, breeding new generation after new generation, and the ark comes in that we would keep them, we would breed them, we would save species, and then eventually, hopefully, mankind becomes more enlightened, things happen, things change, and one day, someday, when the habitat for these endangered species has been restored, we could then let the animals out of the ark, out of the zoo, and repopulate the world. And that's how zoos really thought that their mission, really saw their conservation mission as being. This was in the early mid-60s. So the first Endangered Species Act first Endangered Species list was in 1967. And there were 78 species on the endangered species list when it first started. And so it was quite possible. It was quite possible at that time that the zoos of the world could get together and save those 78 species. But of course, that's not the case anymore. There are now over 1,300 species on the federal U.S. endangered species lists. The IUCN lists over 17,000 endangered species, and they would admit that that's just the ones that we know enough about to say that they are definitely endangered. It's just gotten so gigantic that there's just no way that zoos are going to be able to have much impact unless we change our strategy and not just breed animals in captivity and say it's done, but develop conservation and research departments, partner with outside agencies that have sway over habitat and over regulations and things like that, and look at whole habitat questions like the Wolf River Conservancy does. That's the wave of the future for zoos, and that's kind of what we think of when we decide on what our programs and projects are going to be here in our department. So these are the programs that I'm going to talk about tonight. We call these our Conservation 6, our C6. Now we do many other programs, we do research and projects, lots of things, but the C6, so those are distinctive. These are programs that the entire zoo is behind, from marketing to fundraising to education. These are programs where we put a lot of resources into them, frankly a lot of money, as I'll mention during my talk. And these are programs that we've committed to focusing on in a big way long term. These are big problems that we feel that we need to weigh in on and do our good deeds. And I'm often asked, well, how did you pick these 6 out of all the different conservation issues that are going on in the world? And I think the way that we did this, we sat down and talked about it for a long time. What they all had in common is they had somebody with, I would say, a peculiar passion for this particular species. Maybe a little crazy, a little focused, but in every case we had somebody that was really, really going to take this and never let go of it. And in many cases, those people also had, I would say, an excessive amount of expertise in that particular species. So we had that power, that passion, and that knowledge somewhere in our staff. The other thing that we look for with these programs is we sort of have an unofficial saying in our conservation and research department, kind of guides our decisions only in Memphis. We want to be involved in conservation programs that maybe aren't only done in Memphis, but where the Memphis Zoo and our staff and our programs have a unique and our own contribution to a particular species problem. Some zoos, and I'm not knocking them, but some zoos take the path where they will simply support, in terms of money and PR and marketing, other big programs. And in that way, they have an impact on conservation, and they do. But we try to do things that are very specific to us, that the Memphis Zoo can kind of put their stamp on and can lead. And so these are all species where we saw an open niche for us to get involved in. Some cases we are partnering with big organizations, big projects, as you'll see, but still we have our own section there that we can make an impact in, the Memphis Zoo can make an impact in. And in some cases, these are things that we truly started from the beginning, kind of invented and led and got going from the very beginning. So, quickly, I'll just talk about the species. The first one is the Louisiana pinesnake, which is the rarest snake in North America. Probably only about 200 have ever been seen in the wild. The next is the dusky gopher frog, kind of the frog equivalent of that. We could debate it, but I'm going to say that it's the most critically endangered frog in North America. It's certainly one of the top 2 or 3. The Sumatran tiger, which is of the 6 species of tigers that are still around, that haven't gone extinct, is, I think, the next one that will go extinct. The Grauer's gorilla. To talk a little bit more about gorillas, but that is the most critically endangered of the gorillas and the one most in need of conservation work. Some gorillas have good conservation programs, some don't, not so much, and that's one of those. African elephants is kind of interesting. They're not critically endangered, but they, at least in the wild, they're actually more endangered in captivity than they are in the wild. But it's a species that we have that peculiar passion and that great expertise and a lot of history in helping African elephants in the wild. So that's why we continue to focus on that one. And then the first one I'm going to talk about, which isn't species specific, it's the only one so far that is not, it talks about whole habitat. So the Memphis Zoo is one of the very few zoos in the United States that actually has its own field research station in another country. And this started with a partnership a relationship between Dr. Sheila Poo, who's our curator of research at the Memphis Zoo, sitting over there, and her friend and colleague Inoka Kudavindanaje, who is a Sri Lankan conservation biologist. Sheila and Inoka knew each other from graduate school and from collaborations afterwards, so they were friends, they knew each other. And I always like to say, and this is the thing, if I've learned one thing about big conservation programs that are successful and have durability, always are based on relationships between people, real relationships. Friendship or just knowing somebody well for a long period of time. I mean, in every case, that's the difference. So they had this professional and personal relationship. They knew each other. They said, hey, let's see if we can develop a program in Sri Lanka, a facility in Sri Lanka. The other thing is that there really aren't many outside organizations, there's plenty in Sri Lanka, but outside organizations in other countries that are really working in a deep way in Sri Lanka. There's one zoo that does do some programs in Sri Lanka, none others. So there was that open niche, so you can see that those criteria were met for a good C6 program. So, yes, absolutely, you can interrupt me at any time.
Are you going to tell us some of the things they do study there?
Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about that, yeah. Yeah, and I'll say also, after the talk, Sheila can fill you all in later. So I'm not sure if this is the video or not. I think it is. So I think this is a video. This is a real short video, but it just gives you a taste of what I'm talking about.
In Memphis, probably the most exotic thing to see would be a deer, but in Sri Lanka, you would drive around and you would see an elephant. Habitats, animals, people. For the sake of biodiversity, we all were on the same team. This is our mission: species protection, establishing a protected area. This is a group effort toward one lofty goal, but I think it's attainable.
So you saw there some of those aerial shots. You saw a building that's complete and then one that doesn't have a roof yet. So we have two buildings in Sri Lanka. This is a partnership, I should say, with Inoka and her organization. They call themselves TERN, the Tropical Education Research Network, I believe is what it stands for. So they've been doing conservation work there with partners in Sri Lanka for a long time. And it was such a natural partnership to partner with TERN. So this is a 50-50 relationship in setting up our care center. What is conservation, awareness, research, and education. There you go. Okay, that's our facility there that we're doing. So, very proud of the Memphis Zoo and what we're doing here. Like I say, not many zoos have this to talk about. And this only started about 2 years ago. It's just an idea, and we already have two buildings. Why Sri Lanka? Besides what I've already said about the natural partnership that was waiting for us to really consummate. Well, Sri Lanka is a biodiversity hotspot. There are so many species in Sri Lanka, and so many of them are endemic. Probably everybody knows Sri Lanka, but for maybe a few that aren't, it's an island just off the south of India. It's separated from India for a long time, and so endemic species of all manner, plants to mammals and everything in between, have developed there. So, and there are some problems, as there are in most any country, deforestation, population putting pressure on the habitat that remains. So they have a lot of national parks. It's a very enlightened country in that regard, but they have lots of problems. So they have, like everybody does, and so there are endangered species, there are endangered habitat, many endemic species. This could be a talk in and of itself. The only 5 tarantulas that are on the U.S. endangered species list are of the genus Poecilotheria, and those are Sri Lankan species. Most of them are endemics. I'll talk a little bit more about them in a minute. Other just endemics, I could put 50 pictures up here. The Javan crate, one of the most venomous snakes in the world, only found in Sri Lanka. Trimerosaurus trigonocephalus, the Sri Lankan tree pit viper, only found in Sri Lanka. The blue magpie, what an incredibly beautiful bird, only found on the island. The sloth bear. Now there are sloth bear subspecies up on mainland India and Asia, but the sloth bear on Sri Lanka is an endemic subspecies and quite a bit different. Doesn't have the chest marking, has much shorter hair, so it's very distinctly different animal, only there, and also under a lot of pressure, one in particular. And the slender loris, another great animal that we had for a while at the Memphis Zoo, critically endangered, only found in Sri Lanka. And one species of rock frog also, that's very rare. And like I said, I could go on and on and on and on. So that's why we're in Sri Lanka. One of the first projects that we're actually going to do, so there have been other activities there. Inoka has brought school children in to the centers to perform some classes and some environmental education. But and there's a couple of interns that are one is going to do some research on elephants, and then there's going to be another research project that they are going to do or have just begun doing. And we're supporting a master's student along those lines. So there's already some work starting. The first research that Memphis Zoo people are going to be involved in will be early next year. Sheila, Beth Roberts, also of our Conservation and Research Department, and myself will be going over there working with Sri Lankan biologists to study the endangered tarantulas over there, to basically to develop our gene banking. Basically, we're going to freeze sperm from endangered tarantulas, figure out how to do it and how to recover it so that it's still alive, with an eye towards eventually being able to do artificial insemination with endangered tarantulas, which nobody has ever done before. I don't know if many biologists have ever even thought about that. So we're really going to be on the cutting edge. And there'll be many, many more projects to come. This is really an investment in the future to the Memphis Zoo. I mean, we've already made great strides on the first 2 years, but this is something that's going to be going on for decades and decades, and there's no telling where it's going to go. Been very expensive up till now. So far, we've spent, in just 2 years, we've provided almost $50,000 to get this project up and running. We have one completed building off there to the left. That's the base camp where researchers will live and eat and stay. And then we have the field station, which is on the bottom right there, which is still under construction. It's a little further out in the habitat. It'll have lab equipment, things like that for researchers to work. So it's very, very exciting. Stay tuned as the decades pass. Much, much more to say about that. I'm going to switch to our second C6 program, gorillas, specifically Growers gorillas. Now, probably everybody here has seen a gorilla in a zoo, I'm sure. Now, maybe some of you, have any of you done any gorilla trekking in Uganda or Rwanda? All right, then I guarantee you everybody here that has seen a gorilla has seen a western lowland gorilla. So there are two species of gorilla, and each one of those species has two subspecies, a highland subspecies and a lowland subspecies. It's very, very symmetrical. So there's the western gorilla, and the lowland species is the zoo gorilla, the circus gorilla when they had them there. This is the familiar gorilla that everybody has seen. And then there is a highland species of western gorilla, which is called the Cross River gorilla. Very little is known about that. It's found primarily in Cameroon and Nigeria, but it's just different and not much is known about it. It's probably very endangered, but nobody really knows. Very difficult to get in there and study it. And then there's the eastern gorilla, and although you may not have seen one, anybody that's read Gorillas in the Mist or knows about Dian Fossey, that's the eastern highland gorilla, also known as the mountain gorilla. I don't believe there are any mountain gorillas in captivity in zoos. I might be wrong, but very few. I don't think there are any. But they're there, and those are the ones that people track and see in the wild. That's all Dian Fossey's work, the reason why we're familiar with those gorillas. And then there's Growers gorilla, which is the eastern lowland gorilla. This gorilla didn't select where it lives, but unfortunately it made a bad choice in a tongue-in-cheek kind of way. It's the only one of the four types of gorillas only to be found entirely in one country, and that country is the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's not a good place to be if you're a critically endangered species. I mean, many species face pressures, but as you probably know, Congo is a place of horrible, horrible poverty, violence, civil unrest. People who live in Congo day to day are worried about whether their family will eat and will be alive tomorrow. And this goes through the whole country. It's a dangerous place to work, dangerous place to live. And so in that kind of a situation, habitat conservation and endangered species conservation is just not a priority. People are just trying to survive. But that's a real problem for Growers gorillas. So there's not much law. There's laws to protect the gorillas. There are reserves where Growers gorillas are supposedly protected, but massive amount of poaching. There's rebels, there's guerrillas in there, there's deforestation. Big, big, big trouble. The FAWCY organization is well aware of this and tries to work with Grauer's gorillas, but they even don't go into the Democratic Republic of Congo. You might not get out alive. So they work proxy across the border with contacts over there. And the way that they do that is there are conservation-minded people who live in Congo. Specifically, I'm thinking about the villagers that live around the Nkuba Preserve, which is one of the large areas of tropical forest that's, on paper anyway, protected, and it's really the main site of Grauer's gorilla populations. But there's no real protection there. There's no law enforcement. So the Nkuba villagers, they're very proud of their habitat, they're proud of their forest, they're proud of their wildlife, and they're aware of the gorillas, and they want to protect those gorillas, and they want the lawlessness out of their forest, and they want people to stop shooting gorillas for bushmeat, chopping down the wood for charcoal production. They want to stop that. They're horribly poor, and they have no way of doing that. So the FAWCY organization developed the concept of providing money, which funds training for Nkuba villagers to be law enforcement patrols, to arm them, to give them uniforms, to give them equipment like rubber boots, walkie-talkies, and all that manner of thing. So it provides employment for people that have no other option for employment. It provides an ability for them to protect their wildlife. And that's the Nkuba village civilian patrols are really the only hope for Grauer gorillas' survival in the wild. Grauer's gorilla is a very interesting animal. It is the largest living primate in the world. It's the largest gorilla in the world, the largest living primate. Male Grauer's gorillas can exceed 450 pounds, and when they stand up on their hind legs, like they sometimes do, they can be bipedal. A big male can stand 6.5 feet tall. You imagine a 450-pound man, 6.5 feet tall, who's solid as a rock. That is jaw-droppingly inspiring. They're physically different too. They tend to have, that's a picture of one, it's not the best picture, but they tend to have relatively hairless faces. So you basically just see a lot of their skin, and they have very elongated faces. They just look different, and they're woolly. They're neither short-haired nor long-haired. They're a very distinctive animal besides their gigantic size. And these are some of the pictures of the Nkuba villagers wearing uniforms and backpacks and all that sort of thing provided by FAWCY. Now, here's where the Memphis Zoo comes in. We have committed to provide the money to the FAWCY Foundation every year to support the Congo program, the Nkuba villager program. Costs about $18,000 a year, which is not much given the money the results that this provides. So that's our part on this, and it's something that the Memphis Zoo, we don't do it. I'm not trying to take credit for it. The FAWCY organization does that, but we support that and give them financial stability. We would like to do physical work over there in Africa, but it's just best left to the experts. But that's one way that we can help Grauer's gorillas. We always struggle, Sheila and I talk about this all the time, we're always struggling to figure out ways to fund these programs. Conservation is very expensive. We just recently, just a couple days ago, or about a week ago, we had our first golf tournament over at the Overton Park golf course to try to raise money for our contribution to FAWCY. And we raised about $8,000 total, which fell below what we needed, but it wasn't a bad start. So I just want to send out a preview to you guys. Next year, we just had a meeting today, we're going to do it much bigger and better, and we'll hopefully market it very strongly. We need people to come out and support that. All right, let's switch to tigers. There were originally, up until recent times, 9 subspecies of tigers, each one distinctive and different and precious. Today, only 6 subspecies are still extant. 3 have gone extinct, and several others are this close. I may live long enough to see the rarest of these tigers go extinct in the wild, and that's the Sumatran tiger. Sumatran tigers are very distinctive. They're the darkest color of all tigers. They're also the smallest tiger. They're tiny little cats, tiny little tigers. Males only weigh about 450 pounds, and they may only be about 5 feet long from snout to butt. So tiny little creatures, but they're a small tiger and a jungle tiger, a deep forest tiger, so not much is known about them. You can't protect something that you don't know much about. How many are in the forest? Where are the hot spots? And so for about a year and a half, the Memphis Zoo funded and staffed the largest camera trap survey for Sumatran tigers that had ever been attempted. And so we took many photographs of Sumatran tigers and got a lot of really important information that is being used by an organization over in Sumatra called the Leisure Foundation. And they oversee the leisure ecosystem, which is the last large remaining intact portion of tropical rainforest in Sumatra, and one of the last in Indonesia, and the last stronghold for Sumatran tigers in the wild. But they don't know for sure how many tigers are in the forest or what particular parts of the forest that they utilize the most and need to be protected most urgently. So this camera trapping survey was very helpful to them. One of the things that you get with camera traps, both photo and video traps, is some really cool, candid videos of wild tigers. So here is one. Might have to play this twice. I'll just let you see what happens first. Isn't that cool? That's a wild tiger. Probably never seen a human being. Whoops, hang on a second. See if I can. But he saw this weird device strapped to a tree and came over and checked it out. So that's kind of cool and entertaining. But we also get really useful information. During the course of our camera trap survey, we individually identified the presence of 8 Sumatran tigers in about 800,000 acres of rainforest. Now there are probably more, but actually that's a surprising number. Tigers have huge home ranges and don't live dense. They don't want to hang out with each other and live in packs or anything like that. So 8 tigers, probably some more, in 800,000 acres of tropical rainforest is a hot spot for Sumatran tigers. Not only did we identify them and find out that important information for the Leisure Foundation, but we also got important information and also kind of cool information. This is a mother with cubs. And you can see maybe a tree off in the center, right in the center, that's a camera trap, kind of about level there. And so the arrays were set up with 2 traps that kind of face each other. And we had, I think I said, we had over 100 traps scattered out across the forest. And they captured all manner of really interesting things. The other thing they captured that are interesting is probably in many cases poachers. Some of these folks maybe were going through the forest to collect berries or nuts, perhaps, but we definitely saw folks carrying guns, whether they were after tigers or not, maybe not, but they were certainly out to poach wildlife for bushmeat. And the other thing that they do is they set snares. They set wire snares all over the forest, and these are just brutal things that are out there. They catch anything and everything in wire snares. Animals can't get free. You can probably imagine what happens then. And they catch a lot of tigers. One of the videos and photographs that I won't show was we documented a big male Sumatran tiger that had surely been caught in a snare, but had somehow managed to free himself. Foot fell off, or he chewed his foot off, and he's walking around the leisure ecosystem limping on 3 legs with a little stub here. But he did survive. They're horrible. So just like with the Growers gorillas, so difficult to get in there. Now it's a similar type of a thing. There's an ethnic group that lives in villages around the leisure ecosystem called the Gayo. And they, again, also have a high environmental ethic. They really want to protect their wildlife. They don't want poachers in there, but they need the money. Same thing as the Growers gorilla. They need training. They need guidance. And so the leisure ecosystem is doing the same thing that FOSSI is doing in Congo, supplying these folks and guiding them and giving them some instruction and support so that they can go out and patrol, and they go out every day and try to find snares primarily and disable them. Yes? Have not had that. They're expensive. You know, they're few and far between. You know, I know from being out in the woods, sometimes I've been. There's a picture of me in the pinesnake group of me standing in the forest down in Louisiana, looking kind of daft and lost. And it's camera traps for pinesnakes snapping pictures of me. You don't tend to see them if you're not specifically looking for them. So we have not had that problem. So I'll do a couple shots here. So there's one fellow. Hang on a second. Oops. I knew this might not. I don't know if this may or not play. Well, it doesn't matter. There's a series of shots. But we got pictures of various people sitting around there, some with guns, some with satchels or collecting things they shouldn't be collecting. That program costs about the program needs to be expanded. They've got about 8 individuals that are doing these patrols. Leisure Foundation wants to double that and double the equipment, all that sort of thing. It's going to cost about $15,000 a year to do that. We have not pledged that money because we don't have it, but that's where we want to, now that the camera trap survey is over, where we want to find our niche with Sumatran tigers is to provide enough funding to the leisure folks to where they know that they have a stable financial base to be able to expand and then run this civilian ranger patrol program. All right, African elephants. Amanda Schweigert isn't here, but some of you may know Amanda. She's now our elephant manager, and she's that champion. She's that elephant champion. So she, years and years ago, partnered with an organization called Elephants for Africa, and has been sending, doing little fundraisers, selling glow lights and balloons and this and that, just doing whatever she can to send a few $1,000s over to Elephants for Africa year after year after year, doing it all by herself. Finally, a couple years ago, the zoo really got behind her and put the force, now that it's a C6, of our marketing department and our fundraising department to try to up the amount of money that we're providing to Elephants for Africa. Every year we send a couple of elephant keepers over there and they assist with some of the research they're doing. Main thing Elephants for Africa is doing is they're trying to mitigate human-elephant conflict. Now I would have thought that living out in Africa near a national park where elephants and giraffes and rhinos are roaming just right in there would be kind of idyllic. But if you're a farmer and you have a subsistence farm plot in your yard that you require, and elephants step over the national park fence and trample all your crops in the course of one evening, it's not so idyllic. You don't like elephants. And you don't like the national park being there. And you don't support conservation efforts. And one thing I've also learned in conservation, if the local folks who are affected by what biologists and conservationists come in and do don't like it, it's not good for them, it's not recognizing the impact on them, they won't support it. And if they don't support it, you're going to have a really hard time of being effective. So we have to address this problem of elephants getting outside the national park and going rampant through the villages and causing all kinds of problems for those people. So they're tracking elephants with support of the Memphis Zoo. And this map, this little video down the bottom will show the movements of one particular elephant. Starts down in the lower left, that's the national park. And then you'll see the red lines kind of increase, and then he decides to take a walk. And he goes north-northeast in a minute. These are just, okay, there he goes. He's left the park. He's heading north. That's a village that he's hitting right now. He's walking all around the farm, and no good. So why are they doing that? They seem to have all the resources that they need in the national park to a quick look. So what the Memphis Zoo is doing, is helping to do, is to fund, currently, we've done a lot of things over the years, but currently we are funding a satellite tracking study. There are 10 bull elephants in the Makadati Pans National Park. This is the park that we're talking about. And these bull elephants are knocked down, sedated, and then they wear this gigantic collar with this gigantic device on the bottom part of it, and they don't even know it's there because they're gigantic bull elephants, and they're satellite trackers. So from the comfort of their labs there in town in Africa, they can track these elephants wherever they go. We're trying to see the patterns. What are the egress points? Where are they going? Are they after minerals, as one hypothesis states? Are they going particularly through one particular area that could be shored up with fencing or barriers or some kind of way to understand the problem, understand what they're doing, why they're doing it? That's where we're at right now. But if we can understand those things with this tracking study, we can maybe stop it, mitigate it, and bring all the people on board to protecting elephants. Okay, now we'll talk about some herps. We do some herpetology work. The dusky gopher frog is the most endangered frog in the United States. The story of that frog, so it's native to southwestern Alabama, southeastern Mississippi, or all of southern Mississippi actually, and it was probably occurred in what we call the Florida parishes in extreme southwestern Louisiana, so a small portion of the Gulf Coast. That's its only known habitat. By 2001, the only dusky gopher frogs in the world, there was no captive program, all bred around a little low spot in the forest that was later named Glenn's Pond, but it's basically just a low spot in the land that during the winter fills up. It's just a big puddle about the size, well, it's about, I don't know, it's 2-3 times as big as this room, but it's just a little puddle in the forest, and the frogs breed there. And that was the only place that they survived. At that point, they believed that only about 100 to 150 dusky gopher frogs existed at any given moment. They would breed, tadpoles would develop in there, they would come out. Naturally, there'd be a huge mortality, as there is naturally for frogs. The adults would die off, so it was kind of a stable 100 and 150 adult frog population. That is very, very, very tenuous. And we always say with endangered species, even when they're well protected in a national park and all that, it just takes one natural disaster to come in, some unforeseen thing that comes in that could wipe out those 50 well-protected frogs or 500 well-protected giant pandas or whatever it might be. Things are stable now, but it's very delicate. Well, that's what happened with the dusky gopher frog. They were hanging in there at 100 and 150 frogs, and they might have done that for forever. But the first thing that happened was a disease that came out of the blue, a new emergent disease that may be related to a disease that affects oysters in the Gulf, but it popped up out of nowhere and it zapped those frogs. And in 2002, 2003, the entire recruitment, the entire reproductive season for the dusky gopher frogs was wiped out in the pond. So these 100 frogs that only live about 3 years, 3, 4, 5 years in the wild, had no youngins coming along to replace them, and they were rapidly going to die out. That spells extinction in about 3 years, and it was in the next year as well. Did my mic die? Which one? This one?
No, that one.
Yes, it did. All I can do is talk loud.
Yeah.
Try to be a little louder. Can you hear me okay if I kind of project my voice a bit?
Batteries up here.
Yeah, I can hear you in the back.
Okay, I can usually talk pretty loud. I'll just keep going and maybe it gets fixed. So the Memphis Zoo came along in 2003. We recognized an opportunity, and so we gathered up about 20 or 30 tadpoles that had survived, and we brought them back to the zoo, and here we are, however many years it is later, 23 or whatever years later, and we are now deeply involved. So to date, the Memphis Zoo and this program is headed by Dr. Pooh and her staff, Dr. Ann Sabal, and supported by our husbandry staff who raised thousands and thousands of frogs, and Sarah Pepperman, our research technician, and others in the past. So we've been breeding frogs in captivity, in zoos, a lot of them at the Memphis Zoo, also some partner zoos that assist us with this, and then releasing them into the wild. To date, we've released over 10,000 dusky gopher frogs back in and around the Glenn's Pond habitat. We have now for several years seen breeding. So these are all, we're releasing them in an area that once had dusky gopher frogs but haven't had dusky gopher frogs in there for many, many decades. So all the dusky gopher frogs in our release site are from zoo breedings, and now they're breeding. So they're taking hold. And Dr. Sabol is down there right now trying to confirm scientifically that they're established, self-sustaining, but I think it's pretty obvious without the data that they already are. They're going to be able to take care of themselves, and we've established a wild population. And now we're looking to a second site. So if you go down to Ward Bayou Wildlife Management Area and go down there in a cold, rainy January, February night pouring down on you, you will hear this sound that hasn't been heard in that portion of southern Mississippi in probably about 60 years. Sounds like I had an Uncle Leroy that used to snore like that. But they're taking back hold again. Talk a little bit about our last C6. This is our oldest one. The Memphis Zoo started working on these back in the mid-1980s, kind of maybe our flagship C6, working with them for a long, long time. And we have also been reproducing those since the late 1980s, and releasing them since, oh gosh, I've forgotten how long it's been, 5 or something like that. So at this point, it's a lot. Snakes reproduce a lot slower than frogs. So at this point, we've released 500 Louisiana pine snakes into their habitat. But that's pretty good for snakes, especially Louisiana pine snakes that only produce usually about 3 to 6 eggs per female, only once a year instead of thousands and thousands like a dusky gopher frog would. That's one of the reasons why they're endangered. They have a very low reproductive rate. But it is the rarest snake in North America, and of course I had to bring one while I talk about it. And
Hold on. Stay right there.
I don't chase people with snakes, but there's no reason to be afraid of this snake. They're harmless. And I'll say after my talk, anybody wants to come up and touch him or hold him, whatever, you get a good opportunity to do that. But I just wanted to bring him out now. You can hear he's hissing a little bit. Most snakes don't hiss, but pine snakes, bull snakes, gopher snakes, all their relatives do. There he goes. He's not super happy, but they're tame, and they're not tame, but they're not aggressive. They're not venomous, totally harmless. So, but only about 200 to 250 Louisiana pine snakes have ever been documented in the wild. They were discovered in 1928. They were first described in that year. Since that time, hardly any have been found. They were probably already in big trouble. Yes, question? Snakes like to be in bags. That's a pillowcase, but I call it a snake bag. Snakes get very quiet when they're in a sack like that, and they feel very comfortable. Yeah. So anyway, we have had over 1,500 Louisiana pine snakes kind of come through our breeding program, our zoo breeding program, since we first started it. Of course, a lot of those have long since died, natural causes, just lived out their lives. But we've had that many animals come through our program when only about 200 wild animals are known. When I first started this effort, they were known from 4 very fragile, very vulnerable, separate populations throughout, in East Texas and central Louisiana. Just in my short period of time, my short professional career, I've seen them now go extinct in Texas. They're gone. The last Louisiana pine snake in Texas was found in 2007. And one of the areas in Louisiana no longer supports the species. So there are only 3 populations known where there were recently 7, just in the course of about 40 years. But there's some good news, and we'll talk about that. Let me get this guy back in the bag. That's it. He's happy. Okay, so that's the C6. We'll come back. Oh yeah. Okay. That's the C6. We'll come back to the Louisiana pine snakes briefly at the very end. I want to talk about a couple of slightly different things that are probably going to develop. Well, one in particular is going to develop into a big program. First, I want to mention the Walker Tract. I just love what you do, and one of the great things that you've done is you've acquired this very unique property there, just south of LaGrange. I'm sure probably all of you know why it's so cool, but the thing that blew me away when I first visited it with Alan Trentley was the presence of sand scrub oak that occurs there, and the sandy habitat and the prickly pear cactuses that grow there. And it's the kind of habitat that I would expect to see pine snakes, but I would expect to see it in Louisiana or North Florida, not in West Tennessee. And as Alan would talk about in great length, it's the only sand post oak habitat in Tennessee. It just doesn't belong there, but there it is. So I got thinking, there's got to be some interesting reptiles and amphibians there. So I've set up a small trapping survey over there in the sandy portions of the Walker Tract. It's only been running since October of 2024. I haven't found anything earth-shattering yet, not quite finished. I wouldn't be surprised if there are northern pine snakes there, if there are western pygmy rattlesnakes there, if there are glass lizards there, and crawfish frogs. Those are the kind of things I'm hoping to find. But already there's been some notable things found. The ones in particular that I would say, this is an array of some of the reptiles and amphibians that I've found. The notable ones are Nematophorus sexlineatus, up at the upper right, the race runner. It's known in this portion of the Mid-South, but it's very rarely seen because it is a sand dweller, a xeric habitat sand dweller. They're abundant up there, and they're the only ones that I've ever seen in the Mid-South. I've heard that there may be some in a sandy area on President's Island, maybe, maybe not. But anyway, it's not publish worthy that it occurs there, but it definitely points to the fact that the Walker Tract is some very interesting habitat. Same thing just below that, spadefoot toads. They're around. They're less rare than the Nematophorus, but you know, they're kind of habitat specific. You don't see them everywhere by no means. They are the abundant amphibian based on the trap success. There are some times when it's been raining where I'll take 30 or 40 spadefoot toads out of the traps and release them. So anyway, interesting. And on the bottom left there is a smooth earth snake, Virginia valerae. We have Virginia striatula all over the place. That's the snake you find under field stones in your backyard in Midtown. They're super common. But the smooth species of earth snake is a very rare snake. And I found that snake on the Walker Tract. Don't know what it means, but it's just it's a biodiverse area in terms of reptiles and amphibians. We'll continue to run these traps. The scarlet snake in the center, the beautiful snake, was also probably the highlight for me. It's actually recorded in West Tennessee. It's an uncommon snake. In fact, there are records from the Walker Tract that preceded my finding it. But it was a great day when I found that snake. Beautiful snake, and an uncommon snake in West Tennessee. So the work continues there. The other thing I want to talk about is kind of, in a way, it's sort of abrupt and out of place, but I'm just going to throw it out here right now. So Sheila and I are working on a rapidly developing plan to work with another very iconic reptile from Tennessee, and that's the alligator snapping turtle. They are in trouble throughout a lot of the range. In some areas they're holding on pretty well, but in Tennessee, especially West Tennessee, they've almost vanished. I mean, they're very, very rare here, and nobody really knows why. Over in Arkansas, there used to be massive commercial trapping for meat to supply primarily Louisiana restaurants for turtle soup, turtle stew, but not known to be a big problem in West Tennessee. You know, there's some of the channelization of rivers, certainly, not commercial, but like trot lining, catching turtles on hooks, and then not treating them well once they've been caught might be a contributing factor, but it's not really known. Another thing that's not known is exactly where they still occur in West Tennessee. And as I said with tigers, you can't protect them unless you really have a firm understanding of where they are and where they aren't, and where they could be but aren't, that sort of thing. And so there's been some preliminary work, but Sheila and I and our colleague over in Arkansas State, Dr. Newman Lee, are collaborating on a project where we will do surveys starting this next year, early this next year, to try to find out where alligator snappers still occur in West Tennessee. One of our focuses is the Wolf River. You may not know, and maybe some of you do, but the type specimen for the alligator snapping turtle, the first one that was noticed by a scientist, and they said, this is something I've not seen before, and the description, the formal description, was found in the Wolf River, right at the mouth of the Mississippi. In other words, Harbor Town, over there by Mud Island, back in the early or mid 1800s. So it's kind of a Memphis story there. Whether, how much, and where it occurs in the Wolf River, we don't know. So this is the kind of abrupt part I would like to discuss with you folks in the Conservancy about the possibility of collaborating with you and working on alligator snapping turtles in some areas of interest. So we know this will develop into a big project, and we hope it involves a partnership with you all as well. In case you need any convincing, I brought one. Oh, this is the small one. I can also bring him out later and let you look at him a little closer. Yeah, over across the river on the other side, they call these Arkansas nail clippers. But this is the small one, probably a female. I actually think I hatched this one out. There's three ones like this that are now around, and I donated some little ones a long time ago. But They're really cool. Some of you may be familiar with this species. They're actually, in terms of their disposition, they're little marshmallows. They really are. I'm not going to do it, but I could probably put my finger in his mouth, and he probably wouldn't snap down on it. Huh? Yeah, I'm not going to. So it's a lot of boast, but they're not like a common snapper, in which case I'd be holding it differently, and I'd be very focused on the turtle because he'd be trying to bite me. But alligator snappers just sit there and go like that. And that's about all they do. They're very yeah. When they're frightened like this, and also when they're in the wild, some of you may be able to see the little pink thing, and you all know about the sublingual lure. So it looks just like an earthworm, and they'll just sit down there, and he's wiggling it really good right now. They'll sit down there and just wiggle it with their mouth open. The fish come up and nibble that worm, and then lights go out. Yeah. How old is this one? It's probably about 20 years old. Females, this is a female. Females don't get, I mean, they may get twice this size. It's the males that get gigantic. Males can get over 250 pounds, and I couldn't, you know, they're just humongous, but males are the big ones. They're very different in a lot of ways. In many parts of their range, they eat primarily freshwater mussels, so they're not the generalist carnivores that common snappers are. Very food specific. They are one of the largest freshwater turtles in the world. They are by far the largest freshwater turtle in North America. Just an iconic southern animal. I mean, this just speaks the South. And really in trouble in West Tennessee. We're going to try to get to the bottom of it. We also envision in the next couple of years working with TWRA to do some head starting, if not actual breeding, and releasing alligator snapping turtles to repopulate them here once we figure out where to put them and why they're not there to begin with. So again, when you want to come up closer for some photo ops and things after the talk, I'd be happy to take her out later. So I'm almost done with my talk. I think I just have one more video to show you, and the reason why I'm showing this is it's getting back to Louisiana pine snakes, but it kind of encapsulates, I think, the spirit and the focus and the goals of all of our C6 programs. It's the Louisiana pine snake, so it's our oldest program. So it's had a lot of time to develop. Some of these other programs are only a year or 2 or 3 old. But this is where we want them all to go, this deep in. It's a nice little video. I think it's the next slide, and I'll just let it play. It's about a 3 or 4 minute video. It's a good program, and it's meeting most of its goals. I've mentioned it, that was done about a year or so ago. Now we have a second release site, so we do have that site. We released about 100 snakes onto another site about 60 or 80 miles west of there. I think that's going to catch hold quicker than the first one because we're releasing hundreds of snakes now. We're breeding many more than when we first started the first release site. So I think that's the path to recovery, is creating new self-sustaining populations where there used to be some, haven't been for decades, and that's what zoos can do. As Emlyn said, the Fish and Wildlife Service, Forest Service can't do that part of it. They manage the habitat. So that's where we want all these programs to go, and I think over the next 10, 15 years or so, 20 years maybe, they all will. The last thing I just want to say, I've tried to mention that this work is expensive. But if you'd like to take a picture of that QR code, it'll take you to our website. It'll also let you learn about, go on and on about some of these programs more so than I wanted to do up here. So you can learn more and just be aware of the fundraising events, the golf tournaments, and the wine festivals, and the beer that we sell for conservation, all that kind of thing. That goes to support the Growers Gorilla program, Sumatran Tiger program, Elephants for Africa, all those things I talked about. So anyway, that's the end of my talk, and be happy to answer questions later and take out these animals as well.